Welcome back. All right, I want to talk about four teams that can be seen as contenders right now. Contenders for the Stanley Cup. And we will not know whether or not they're actually contenders until these teams somehow meet each other, which means they'd have to escape their own division in the playoffs. And the odds of all four of them doing it are slim because there's always upsets in the playoffs. And this year could be absolutely ridiculous because whoever they play will have played them a minimum of 8 times. This will be a team that knows them well. And in Toronto's case, it'll be a team that's played them 9 or 10 times. We'll know them very well. So, if we're going to try to figure out how to measure them, you have to kind of look at you have to look at last season for some hints. You have to look at their overall track record this year and who they've been playing. And it's interesting. So we'll start with Tampa. Tampa is 10-2-1 right now, right? So their winning percentage, which is going to be deciding seedings. So how do you decide those final four? Who plays who? They would be decided by winning percentage. So right now, number one of the teams on the board would be Tampa at 808, Vegas 792, Boston 786, Toronto 767. That would have Tampa versus Toronto, Vegas versus Boston. That's how this would go. Tampa being the number one seed, Toronto being number four. That's how they'll do it in the playoffs when you get to the final four. And of course, if we don't have, and that's if we don't have 56 games each. If everybody plays 56 games, it'll just be points. So, all right, clear as mud, clear as mud. Now, for Tampa to get to 10-2-1, they haven't played every team in the division. And I didn't worry about if they haven't played a team that wasn't in last year's playoffs. So you're not going to see every name on this board. So we'll get into this. Tampa has not played Dallas yet, but they're 0-1 against Carolina. They're 1-1 against Columbus. They're 2-0 against Chicago, 2-0 against Detroit, 1-1 against Florida, and 4-0 against Nashville. Now the asterisks are for teams that when we finished out the season last year, based on winning percentage, they were top eight in their conference. So Nashville and Carolina were top 8. Columbus, Chicago, Detroit, and Florida were not. So the records against those teams, 6-2 overall. And against teams that were top 8, which would be Nashville and Carolina, it's 4-0-1, which looks great. 4 of those are against Nashville. They haven't played Dallas yet. So for Tampa Bay, and this is what was talked about before the season started, this looks like a relatively easy division for them. They're 1-1 in overtime. At home, they're 6-0. On the road, they're 4-2-1. And in the month of February, they are 6-1. So it just keeps rolling, and this is despite the loss of Kucherov for the season. Stamkos has missed the last couple of games, and Cirelli didn't make it into the last game either. So, despite the amount of players they've been losing, they're still managing to find ways to win. They've got 6 more against Detroit. They've got 6 more against Chicago, 6 more against Columbus, Florida. All teams that missed the top 8 in their conference last year. I don't want to say missed the playoffs because we had the play-ins, but we're having regular playoffs this year, kind of. In that it'll probably be winning percentage, but it'll be as regular as we can get this year. But we're not having play-ins, so there won't be 24 teams that make it. So I want to keep it to just the teams that, in terms of standings, would have made the playoffs last year if we'd had normal playoffs. So, for instance, Arizona knocked out Nashville, but Arizona was below Nashville in the playoff run, and Nashville would have been top 8 if we'd just gone with standard regular playoffs. So for me with Tampa, I do see them as playing very, very well, and I think this has been a great run, but they haven't played that many games against teams that you would look at and say are contenders. So is Carolina a contender? Probably. Columbus? No. Chicago? Chicago's had a great little run, but I don't see them as a contender. Detroit? Likely no. Florida? Probably not. And Nashville? Probably not either. Is Dallas a contender based on how they're playing right now? I would say no. So this is where things get kind of dicey because these are the only teams that they're going to play. Until we reach the playoffs, this is it. So again, we may not have a great idea of who the contenders are, and now we move on to Boston. Now Boston, by the amount of asterisks on the board, has the most difficult schedule of teams on the board, and they're 10-2-2 with a 786 winning percentage. So at the end of the year, Boston will have a lower winning percentage than a team that Boston fans will argue shouldn't be ahead of them because they played easy opponents. For Boston, they're 1-0-1 against New Jersey. They're 0-2 against the Islanders. They're 2-0 against the Rangers. 4-0 against Philly. 2-0 against Pittsburgh, and 1-0-1 against Washington. And it is sad that they're 4-0 against Philly, because I'll say at least one of those games probably should have been a Boston loss, but Philly found a way to lose those. They're 3-2 in overtime, so they're good in overtime. At home, they're 4-0, and on the road, they're 6-2-2. So it's been a road-heavy schedule for Boston so far, and they're undefeated at home. These are good signs that Boston should be able to maintain this run and should have a good chance at finishing first in their division. But what gets interesting is teams that didn't finish in the top 8 last year, the only ones on this board are the Rangers and the New Jersey Devils. They have not played Buffalo yet. That's why Buffalo's not on the board. They're 3-0-1 against the non-top 8 teams, against teams that finished in the top 8, which are Washington, Pittsburgh, Philly, and New York. The Islanders, New York. And I know Pittsburgh lost to Montreal, but Pittsburgh was a better team than Montreal, and then in the play-in round, everything just fell apart for Pittsburgh. So they were 7-2-1 against teams that are top 8. They are 7-2-1 against teams that are top 8 from last season. So overall, that's a very, very interesting record in that they have one of the best records against top 8 teams. Tampa hasn't played them very much. Toronto's played them a ton, but we'll come to Toronto because they've got a very good record against top 8s from last year. But you almost have to put an asterisk next to the asterisk. So they were number 1 in the East last year, were Boston, and Tampa Bay was number 2. And then, of course, they had the round robin for the seedings, and Boston just decided no. So, yeah, they are a team that has a pretty good record against top 8 teams. Everything would point to Boston being a contender. You could make the argument Boston right now is playing better than Tampa because Boston has had tougher contention in their opponents than has Tampa, right? And we won't know because they don't play against each other. But again, you could point to the need for comebacks and say, well, Boston. But again, it's almost impossible to measure teams against each other that won't play each other unless they meet in the playoffs. Vegas, 9-2-1, a 792 winning percentage. And looking over their schedule, it reveals why I still don't think we know what Vegas is yet. So they were 3rd in the West in 2019-2020 in overall winning percentage. Here's who they've played. They've played Anaheim 4 times. They've beaten them 3, lost 1. They're 3-1 against Arizona. They're 2-0 against LA. They're 1-0 against San Jose. They are 0-1 against St. Louis. They haven't played Minnesota. They also haven't played Colorado. Colorado, who were top 8 last year, of course, they're playing Colorado today. So after I've recorded this, they'll play Colorado. And I think that might be the first chance we get to see of what they are. Because Anaheim didn't make the play-in round. LA didn't make the play-in round. San Jose didn't make the play-in round. They were bottom 7 in the NHL. And Arizona, though they knocked out Nashville, they got destroyed by Colorado after that. And yeah, so this is a team that was seen as probably being, pretty low down in the standings before the season started in Arizona. So, against teams that were not in the top 8, they were 9-2. And against the top 8 teams, they've played 1 game, and that's against St. Louis, and they lost it in extra time. No idea. So they have a 792 winning percentage. They're 1-0 in overtime. That's not. Oh, I know what that is. That's not including shootouts. That's just overtime. So I'll leave that as it is. So any 0-1s you're seeing are potentially shootouts as well. The chart that I was using, it probably just had the overtime separated from the shootouts. So that is correct. In overtime, Vegas is 1-0, which is fine because the shootout's a tie. I don't care. Shootout loss against St. Louis. Now at home, they're 7-1-1, and on the road, they're 2-1. So the other interesting thing with Vegas is, they're 4-1 this month, right? Whereas Boston's 5-1 and Tampa's 6-1. So all the teams on this board, they're all doing really well in February. But what's interesting is they've played 9 at home and 3 on the road. And even though we're not seeing fans in attendance, and it feels like home ice isn't important, teams are still generally winning more at home than on the road. Generally. And so we'll see when they're on the road and when they're playing Colorado and St. Louis a little bit more often, whether or not Vegas is legit the contender that they're envisioned to be. Because again, it's not a division filled with teams that are necessarily contenders. So, for teams in the tougher divisions, for teams like Buffalo, like New Jersey, I will go ahead and throw in that Vancouver and Ottawa in the North, they don't get to play some other teams where they would likely score victories. For Western Canadian teams, not getting to play the California teams, I think hurts their records. And that's for Edmonton, Calgary, and Vancouver. So for Vegas, does it prop up the record? Absolutely. They could have a great, fantastic overall winning record if they can just keep playing Anaheim, Arizona, LA, and San Jose the way they have early in the season. They go 6-2 against Anaheim and against Arizona. They're 12-4 against those teams, and not too shabby. And so, yeah, I don't know what they are yet. We'll see when they play against Colorado how good they are. But again, I know Vegas fans are all excited, and I get it. But at the same time, they kind of haven't played anybody yet. No offense to those other 4 teams, but you're looking to see how they are against contenders. We're not going to know until they play Colorado. And again, it has to be once they've played the full 8 against Colorado, we'll be able to take a look at it and say, okay, so Vegas is ahead of Colorado because, or Colorado ends up ahead of Vegas. Number 4 on the board here, and in winning percentage, 767, Toronto Maple Leafs. They're 11-3-1. Now, they have 23 points. These guys have 21. These guys have 22, and these guys have 19. So that's where Leaf fans are going to say, see, we're number 1. You point out that they've played extra games, and they'll tell you to shut up, because we mean that way. So for Toronto, this is the trick. You've got 3 teams with asterisks who finished, again, top 8 in their conference in the regular season last year, in Calgary, Edmonton, and Vancouver. Edmonton got knocked out by Chicago in the play-in round, of course. That's why I didn't want to worry about who made it through play-in rounds, because then it just becomes a mess. Thanks Edmonton and Pittsburgh. But Calgary, they're 2-0 against. They are 2-1-1, I should say, against Edmonton. 2-1 against Montreal, 1-1 against Ottawa, 3-0 against Vancouver, and 1-0 against Winnipeg. Now, Vancouver was in the top 8. Edmonton and Calgary were in the top 8 in the West last year. And so against teams that were in the top 8, they're 7-1-1. Against teams that are not top 8 from last year, which are Montreal and Ottawa, they are 4-2 because Winnipeg was not top 8 last year either. Double check, and I'm like, no, I got that right. So they're 4-1 in February, same record as Vegas, 2 less wins than Tampa, 2 less games played, 1 less games played, and 1 less win than Boston. And in overtime, they're 1-1. And at home, they're 6-2, and on the road, they're 5-1-1. They do have the best road record of the teams on this board. But the question mark for Toronto, and this is going to be a thing throughout the season, is how will they do against real contenders from other divisions? Toronto was 8th in the East in 2019-2020. And yes, they underachieved. And this season has been great so far. But somebody's going to point out, you've got Stanley Cup winners here. You've got Pittsburgh won it in 2016-2017. Washington won it in 2018. St. Louis down here won it in 2019. And here's Tampa who won it in 2020. The most recent Stanley Cup win in Toronto's division is Montreal in 1993. So when we get into discussions of who is or who's not a contender, Toronto hasn't been in a Stanley Cup final since 67. Calgary hasn't been in a Stanley Cup final since 04, right? 04 was the last time they were in the final. Edmonton's 06. Montreal it's been since 93, hasn't it? They haven't been back to the final since. Ottawa, Stanley Cup final in 2007. Vancouver, 2011. We know how that ended. And Winnipeg's never made it to a Stanley Cup final. So the difficult thing for Toronto and where it gets really tough is they could go out and destroy this entire division, and the argument will still be they are not as good as Tampa because Tampa won the Cup. They are not as good as Boston. Look who Boston's been playing in their division. And in Vegas' case, Vegas was one of the favorites entering this season. And again, considering who they're playing against in this division, and even though Minnesota's not on the board, Minnesota's not really considered a contender either, Toronto will be seen as number 4 of the division winners. And then the pressure would be on Toronto because, again, having played 9 or 10 games against each team in this division, it's possible that we see a lot of upsets in the first round. It's possible Toronto gets upset in the first round, and that would undo everything. That would make this season an asterisk right here for the purpose that, yeah, they had an awesome record and they were home ice advantage. They had everything going for them. And then the playoffs rolled around and they lost. And so they have to win in the playoffs. The pressure is huge on Toronto right now. And we'll see how they do. So, the question I have for people watching this is, if you're going to rank these 4 teams according to Contender, how would you rank them right now? Who do you think is closest to being a Stanley Cup champion? Because we're not going to find out until, what, June? We're going to find out in June, late June, when these teams would actually have a chance to meet one another. And again, not all 4 of them are going to survive the playoffs. And then we might find out. And if all 4 of them get knocked out in the first round, we'll never know. All right, it is a season unlike any other. It is basically 4 leagues. And it is always interesting to me doing power rankings on a regular season. This year, power rankings are completely different. Because again, you have to kind of look at it and say, well, I think these teams are playing the best right now. And that's why I do the rankings by division as well as by the league. Because I think by division is a little bit easier to tell as in terms of where a team is in the league. There's more guesswork than ever. It's still fun to do, though. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts. Again, rank these 4 teams. Who do you think is closest and who do you think is furthest away? Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video, and I'm wearing Tampa because they're the defending champions. I'm not betting against them right now. But I can understand why people are excited about Boston as well. And for Vegas, maybe having that easier road and going through all these teams that aren't as difficult as what Boston or Tampa or even Toronto may be going through, maybe it makes them fresher in the playoffs. We'll see. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.